One, two, three, four.
um, my well, obviously, I studied poetry at school. I went to school in England. That's where I grew up. And so we studied all the classics, and we did the Shakespeare stuff and Geoffrey Chaucer, which is I'm from Canterbury, so there was
Oh,
a connection there. But really, my love for it came from my dad, who, when I was about 16 years old, this is growing up in Canterbury still, he did a concert with a piano player friend of his called Francis Knight. And it was basically an evening of beat poetry. And so he was on stage reading like Kerouac, Ferlinghetti, Ginsberg, while she improvised piano over it. And I went to see it with my mom, and I was just blown away. I think it was The World is a Beautiful Place, which is still my favorite poem of all time by Lawrence Ferlinghetti. And I heard that, and I was like, oh, wow, that's amazing. Um, and then vividly, I remember for my dad's birthday many years later. So I think I'm going to say it was 2009-ish, because I bought him the kind of blue 50th anniversary box set, which I think would have been 2009, because yeah. And I wrote him a poem because his birthday is December 27th. So it's very close to Christmas. So for his birthday, I wrote him a poem about kind of blue, about listening to it, all of that kind of stuff. Maybe it was the next year, I'm not sure, whatever. And he showed it to a friend of his who really loved it, and who did some jazz poetry nights in London, where I was living at the time, and asked me to go down and do one. And we did a couple of rehearsals with his band, and chose, I think, 3 poems, including the one that was for my dad. And then I kind of realized, oh, maybe there's something in this. Not that it was a lucrative career, obviously, but just that maybe I can write something that people actually like. So I was always very shy about putting myself out there. I initially had a MySpace blog that I started doing it on when that was a thing, and then that went to Blogspot or whatever, and all of those permutations of like online whatevers. And then I just decided a couple of years ago to put the first book out, which was this just collection of everything I'd written pretty much for previous 10 years. It was a way of, because I've been working on this novel for a long, long time. And it was a way of putting something out instead of finishing my novel, basically. It was an excuse to not finish my novel, which I still haven't finished, almost done. So I just gathered things over the last, 8, 9, 10 years that I'd written, and I sort of went through them again, edited a few, and discarded quite a few, and just put something together that I really liked and put out on Amazon, and that was it. Both these books I just did myself. I did it on Amazon, which I know is evil, but it was very easy to use. And yeah, I mean, they've done, it's good. They haven't sold millions of copies or anything, but people seem to really like them on the whole. So yeah, it's kind of like it was me being brave about my writing for the first time in my life, I guess. And then the haiku book was just an idea that I had. Well, I did it in 2018. So I just decided to I'm not very prolific. I'm really horrifically not prolific. So the haiku idea was just a way of me getting into the routine of writing every day. Like, I literally just tried to get whatever I was feeling out, and it was a very, very strange, turbulent year, actually. I started it off in England. I was back home for Christmas, and then it just, I had a lot of friends, I had like 3 friends die that year. I went through a breakup with the girl who took the pictures in the book. It was just a really tough year. I moved from New York briefly back home I'd been home in England and moved back to New York briefly, and then went to Portland to look after my friend's dog for 2 months, and then back to New York. So it was very, very peripatetic, I guess, if that's the right word, very, very turbulent. And it was a good year to write in haiku form, I guess, because everything was happening in different places. So it wasn't just the same location. It's in England, it's in Portland, it's in New York, it's in all these different places. And it's kind of, but yeah, no, the idea, I mean, it's not original. I was a big REM fan, and I still am, but when I was like 16, I was obsessed. And so you probably know this, there was a book called The Haiku Year, that Michael Stipe was in, along with I think Grant Lee Phillips and a bunch of other writers. Maybe Patti Smith was in it as well. I'm not sure.
So yes.
And I think they wrote a haiku a year, or sorry, haiku a day, or a number of haikus a day for a year, and then they kind of jumbled them all up and put them into this book together. And so that's kind of where the idea came from. But I thought I'd do it more chronologically to tell more of an actual narrative and a story than just a sort of a selection of random moments. I think deep down because I love it. As in, like, I started writing because I love it. And when I'm talking about writing, I mean, I'm talking right now about creativity. I love the idea of crafting stories. I love the idea of using my imagination to come up with something that didn't previously exist or didn't exist in that form, I guess. And I went to university. I studied English Lit, which was, great, obviously. And I fell into writing about music for the student paper. And so from there, my love of writing, and actually I studied creative writing there, or as part of my course, and it really put me off. I had these teachers who I just thought were terrible. And I had a poetry teacher who shall remain nameless, but she was awful. And it just really didn't, I mean, maybe my stuff was terrible, probably was terrible, but she didn't help me kind of want to find another way of writing, if that makes sense. She just put me off completely, and I thought the stuff that she was writing was awful too. So I stopped writing creatively for a while. And then I just turned to music journalism because I started writing for the student paper. And then when I left university, I was like, oh, I don't know what to do. This is a good career, not knowing that it wasn't a good career, and not knowing that it was very difficult to get into. But, I loved going to gigs. I loved having my social circle be part of my work, or vice versa. Like, I think that's been the hardest thing of quarantine and coronavirus for me, is that whole aspect of my life, which was almost every day, going to a gig and seeing friends and drinking at the bars afterwards or whatever, that's just disappeared. So yeah, I think I write because I do love it, but I really have to remind myself that I love it sometimes. As I'm sure there are editors that aren't necessarily the best editors in the world. And yeah, it can be a struggle, but something in me has to come out, I guess, whether that's either in my creative writing or just in my reviews, because I try and kind of infuse my writing for magazines with the same kind of, I want to say emotional gravitas, because that sounds really pretentious, but with that kind of effort, I guess. I don't want to just write a report. I want to actually delve deep into the music and try and get something out of it that wasn't previously there. And I think nowadays, more than ever, in the last few years, it's important to kind of share the beauty in the world and, kind of like really share that, because there's not enough of it. And I really hope that if I do anything, it's maybe just add a little bit more of that to people's lives for the brief seconds they're reading my stuff. And that's also why I've decided not to put either of the books I've done out digitally. I don't want them to be Kindle copies. I don't want them to be like PDFs. I want them to be physical things you have to hold and read and touch and feel, because that's, to me, is what poetry should be. It should be like something you keep with you, keep it in your back pocket or your, whatever, inside jacket pocket, and just take it with you. Yeah, I mean, that's a question that could take years to answer, right? I think maybe more than anything, it's to provide a kind of comfort. And whether that comes through understanding or feeling understood by someone else's words or music or whatever, I think it's just a way of not feeling so alone. And if you can look at, a painting and be like, oh, that's beautiful, that makes me feel however it makes me feel, good or happy or excited or scared, and you take that emotion with you. I mean, it's the same with music. I mean, I always love the sad songs, and so I tend to listen to sort of more depressing music. You know, I love Tom Waits, but he's kind of an exception. But, you know, usually it's like The Cure, it's Leonard Cohen, it's Matthew Ryan, it's, you know, REM. And, you know, REM I love, but again, the sadder songs are the ones that I love. Like Country Feedback was the first song I learned to play on guitar. And it's not the only thing I can play on guitar still, but you know, it's like such a beautiful, sad song. But yeah, so I always, for me personally, like when I'm writing, I do it, I guess, to get something that I'm not quite sure what it is out of me. But the purpose of art in a wider scope, I would just say is, yeah, it's to find a little bit of solace and comfort in the world. And whether that's sad music or happy music, doesn't really matter, as long as it makes you feel alive and understood, I guess.